So for some time now, I've been meaning to come out with my updates to the rotations and skill builds for Crossbow and Dagger. You may have seen just before the rune update, I was hitting like 135,000 with my detonation mark with a rotation of over 300,000. And you can achieve even higher than that by maxing out your build. I am currently near that, but I still miss a bit. You can check my builds on Questlog. This is my current build and this is my desired build. The main difference is going to be a few more attributes, but a significant boost to buff duration. Going from 53% down to my current 24% is actually a lot more significant than you guys may realize. It extends the duration of your buffs, which is absolutely massive for Crossbow and Daggers because of one single ability, your Selfless Diffusion. This has so many things going for it. It basically gives you an absolute ton of cooldown reduction, a ton of offhand activation chance, and the effect of increasing the duration of your weakened effects, which means detonation mark, the duration gets extended by nearly up to like 8 seconds, which means the longer you can have this effect active by increasing your buff duration, 60% would make this last for like 10 seconds, which means you can extend the duration of detonation mark up to like 7-8 seconds and output a ton more damage in your rotation. This is how we're getting back-to-back hits with your Thunderclad bombings. So my rotation has needed to be improved to take this into account, including attack speed as well. You need to be boosting this up, and I'm currently like 44.8%. So for PvE bosses, what exactly do you want to be using here to optimize? Well, this is your new rotation, and you might be like, gulp, that's a lot. And it is. But in order to set that up, you need the right specializations, the right skill kit. So get all of these slotted in. And for Cleaving Moonlight, you're going to need those first 3, giving you the extra use, the Thunderclads, the attack speed. Your Inject Venom needs to go to Lightning Infusion. Your Brutal Incision needs to go to Thunderclad's bombings with the cooldown reduction. Ankle Strike needs the extra offhand activation. Now this again is for PvE bosses where reliability is key. And so this is really useful in order to increase the chances that you get the extra offhand activation of detonation mark, meaning this stacks twice, which is absolute massive damage gains. I will show you in Gate of Infinity what you use alternatively. Fatal Stigma, you want the damage increase, and for your crossbow, you want to have the Min Chain Fire, the cooldown reduction, you want to have Nimble Leap 2 with the consecutive use and cooldown reset, detonation mark, you absolutely need that spec there, and Mother Nature's Protest, you need Lightning Arrow. That gives you all of these abilities and ultimately allows you to do this rotation. Now there's a bunch of chance whether or not you can actually pull off this entire rotation, and yeah, it includes 4 Thunderclad bombings, and you have to do all of that within the duration of detonation mark. Now on a dummy, you can't do the second detonation mark cast because there's some bug. Now currently I only have like 24% buff durations, so we can actually only perform 3 Thunderclad bombings, which means yeah, 135,000 on our detonation mark. With a bit more buff duration, you could get that up to 4 times. Be aware though, it's reliant on getting back-to-back lucky with Hastened Arc, getting the cooldown reduction on Thunderclad so you can use it back-to-back just like this here, and then getting all those weakened stacks again and using it again. And you will follow up with using it a 4th time if you get lucky again. If it doesn't trigger and it's still on cooldown, then all you will do in this rotation is skip it and just use it the next time. So ultimately you're going to need to practice this rotation and when to use those abilities. And outside of that entire rotation, you're just going to be using your Lightning Infusion and Detonation Mark one more time with getting your Thunderclad bombings, and then your Selfless Diffusion should be off cooldown. If you're running with a bow user who has Deadly Marker, you're going to get a lot more cooldown, and you're going to be able to use this entire rotation back to back much quicker. And in terms of mana issues, well, you're just going to be keep using mana exchange, use your mana guild potions, and ideally have a healer who puts down the circle, which gives you mana back as well. And otherwise, don't attack the boss when he's doing specific mechanics that he gets a ton of damage reduction. For example, in Carmine Rage Island, when he teleports to the middle and you're playing that phase with the axes while everybody's changed to the pillars, he has significant damage reduction, and you can just not attack and don't use any skills and just wait, because you're basically dealing no damage anyway. That's this phase right here. No point using skills on the boss. You'll do next to no damage. You can see all my little hits there, only hitting for like 80, 100. These should be hitting for like 500 to 1000. All the other bosses have that too. But now we're going to jump to Gate of Infinity. What rotation do you want to use to min-max that? Well, you may have seen a similar version before, and this makes use of Shadow Strike and Weak Point Shot in order to gain a massive boost with that critical damage. 21% when this skill is on rank 5. Now, I've been messing around with spears, so I have switched the levels of some of my skills. But in Gate of Infinity, basically what you're doing is getting this expanded conditions specialization, which means when you use Shadow Strike and put bind on the target, then this extra critical damage effect will apply. Unfortunately, that doesn't work in co-op dungeons because the bosses are different and you can't, say, put that bind condition on them. For some reason, Gate of Infinity bosses, you can apply that. And so your rotation switches a little bit to this. And you also don't need mana exchange, so you have the extra slot there for like Weak Point Shot and Shadow Strike. As you also switch off using Ankle Strike, because the Gate of Infinity is actually pretty infuriating on Crossbow and Dagger. It orientates around getting lucky, and if you don't get lucky, you simply retry. If you don't get a bunch of heavy attacks back to back, if you don't get the offhand activation, you just keep retrying. And you need to keep retrying an absolute ton of times until everything aligns, until you get this rotation perfectly. Because again, you have to trigger the ×2 detonation marks. You have to trigger the ×2 thundercloud bombings to get these specializations, to get the cooldown, to be able to use it again. You then have to trigger again the specialization to be able to get the cooldown, to be able to trigger it a third time. And you have to get that trigger again to be able to then cast it the fourth time. So you have to get this exact rotation to be able to compete with the Gate of Infinity, and it takes you a lot of attempts because the chance to get everything perfectly significantly diminishes when you're trying to get them back to back to back like that. So the skills you will go with is this on your bar, these active ones, these passive ones with these specializations for the dagger and these specializations for the crossbow. You don't need the specialization for the extra nimble leap in most cases. And the final thing I want to cover is multi-target. So when you're just killing groups of enemies, I've changed it up a little bit and you can see the rotation right here. So the first rotation is when you're using, say, Annihilation Barrage Shot. And in order to get the buffs before you use that, you're using your Mother Nature's, your Inject Venom, your Selfless Diffusion, Cleaving Moonlight, and then the Nimble Leap, and then that ability. And it's a massive long cooldown, so you don't exactly get to use it a lot. So while it is on cooldown, you can use this as your rotation, but it's mostly single target, and that is, yes, the drawback of using Crossbow and Dagger. You don't have a lot of multi-target, but they have improved multi-shots, so now it will reset the cooldown of Nimble Leap, meaning you are able to use that a bit more. Now, the reason I recommend switching to just Inject Venom and not using the Lightning Infusion for multi-target is the fact that it actually triggers on all of your ranged attacks. I had assumed initially that it only applies to your melee attacks, as it says in the description, coats your daggers with poison. But that is simply just flavor text, and you can see when we use it on, say, these dummies, that you do put all the poison effects on the enemies, and once you finish using it, you can be hitting them upwards of 1000 per tick. So it's a very nice damage boost to add to there, and you don't need the Thunderclads because your Brutal Incision is primarily single target. And you could argue to use Umbral Spirit, but this actually does only add to melee attacks, unfortunately, so not really viable because you're only really using Cleaving Moonlight and then single target abilities, so you don't trigger that really enough to use, say, Thunder Spirit. Again, these are the rotations I recommend. These are the skills I recommend you using, with then the specializations as follows. You get the extra damage boost on Cleaving Moonlight with the poisons, the extra duration on Inject Venom, the extra damage boost for Brutal Incision, you make Stigma multi-target, you get the damage boost for Frenzy Sword Dance, You will use that pretty much whenever you have it off cooldown and you have the enemies grouped together. It's not specified in this rotation as it doesn't really matter when you use it. But again, the specializations for the dagger are this, and for the crossbow, it's this. You will switch Mother Nature's Protest over to like Gale, because when the enemies are grouped up, that's a massive damage boost. Ultimately on quest log, you can see the builds. Like, again, this is my current build I have. This was my desired build, getting these 2 rings instead. This one's pretty expensive, so maybe I won't for a while. And again, try and get those traits with like buff duration, but currently I'm not prioritizing it as that is pretty expensive and because I want to switch my rings. It is ideal, again, for PvE. Increasing the duration of your buffs is crucial in order to be able to actually output this full rotation. Again, personally, I can only go as far as the 3rd Thunderclad bombings, and on a dummy, if you're checking your damage, don't use the 2nd cast of detonation mark in that rotation, or you will just cancel it. But on bosses, it's no problem. The 2nd cast, if you have one active already, will cause the active one to explode, and then you can cast it and stack more damage and cause that to burst again. So yeah, that's the rotation set here for co-op dungeons, with this skill set up here, specializations for dagger and crossbow, and then the rotation for Gate of Infinity. You min-max a little bit using your Shadow Strike and Weak Point Shot with these as the specializations. And then if you want to min-max multi-target, killing groups of enemies, these are the rotations I recommend, with these as your skills and your hotbar, your dagger specializations, and your crossbow specializations. You are absolutely free to mess around for yourselves, but that's what I found works the best in order to output the most amount of damage. Keep in mind, with my PvE builds, some of the traits are missing, and that's because you actually don't need them. They're not a priority at all. Like, there's no point taking evasion or endurance in PvE. In most cases, it's just not needed. So I wouldn't bother like even spending anything to get that. You can, of course, if you want the CP so it looks good, but that's again going to be up to you. I've just gone with what is required to output good damage on this build, and there is some which is like max mana. That's not required. You don't really need that there, but it will help, and mana regen will help as well. And if the decision is between max mana or mana regen, always go with the regen. Some of you have asked what's the priority with, say, upgrading the skills. Well, one of your big priorities is absolutely going to be Selfless Diffusion. You cannot pull off this rotation without it. After that, I would recommend Quickfire, then Moonlight. If you are in Gate of Infinity, definitely get Weak Point Shot with the critical damage boost upgraded. And after that, it's pretty much just upgrading things all together, as they'll all give you teeny little bit of extra damage boost as you go through the levels. Just get them all to purple and then upgrade the ones you use the most to try and get them to level 5. Passives, you absolutely want to get the extra crit here and the extra crit damage here, with also the extra crit damage from Bloodlust, Nature's Power with the skill damage bonus and bonus damage, Piercing Strike for the bonus damage, Ambidexterity for extra damage, multi-target you can have Assassin's Step, and Murderous Energy for the extra poison damage. And yes, it will take you a while to get your skills upgraded. I personally have switched a lot of my skills over to spear skills, as I've recently been testing that out extensively, and I'm still in the works of figuring out what's the best to use in PvP, large scale and small scale. Ultimately, thanks all for watching. A special thank you to all my channel members, and we'll see you guys around. Goodbye for now.